to meet him in January during the first New York Masonicon at the Grand Lodge in New York City. He really doesn't need a big introduction. He's very well known in the craft here in the U.S. and around the world. Most Worshipful Akram Elias, the past Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. Welcome to the Craftsmen Online podcast.
Oh, thank you so much. It is a great pleasure to be here with you, and it's good to see you again, my brother.
It's awesome to see you. And as I was telling you before we hit the start button, the office that you're in, when you picture a past grandmaster, that's what you envision is plaques and certificate, not somebody's basement. Nothing against that, but I like the office. Before we jump into our conversation on marketing and Freemasonry and promoting our craft, I wanted to start with an honor that you received in 2023. You were selected as a Prestonian lecturer, and we might have a listener that's unfamiliar as to what that is. So, what is that award or that honor, and how were you selected for it?
Well, it was, and it is indeed a great honor to have received it. The Prestonian lecturer designation is probably one of the highest uh, awards that one can get from the United Grand Lodge of England. It is named after William Preston, who back in the 19th century dedicated some money and legacy focused on promoting Masonic education. So what happens is that once a year, the United Grand Lodge of England, and it's a very lengthy process, internal, etc. They select someone to be their Prestonian lecturer, and the person would have to present, that lecture in writing. So it's mine is like a tiny booklet one can find. By the way, you can find it on Amazon. But I was picked for 2023. And the reason for that is that 2023 marked the 300th anniversary of the 1723 constitutions of Freemasonry. And my research, my lecture, is specifically on that and how those constitutions became and I call it the cement, the indispensable trowel, the indispensable trowel that helps cement the foundations of America. So the essence of that is how Freemasonry spread, and I'm not talking about like who the founding fathers of the United States who were Freemasons, how many of the leaders of the American revolutions were Freemasons. There's a lot that has been written on that. The focus of my Prestonian lecture is how the um, the constitutions enabled the spread of Masonic lodges in the colonies, which was an essential thing, critical, in fact, to help teach men at the time who were considered pillars of their respective communities. And by pillar, I mean anyone who would contribute to the development of their community, whether you were a baker or a pastor or an elderman, a statesman, didn't matter. It's like you're contributing. And it was the place where these individuals learned how to govern themselves under a rule of law, pass legislation, and fundamental values existed in those lodges. First and foremost, meritocracy, that you advance through merit.
Mm.
Second, religious tolerance. Third, pursuit of knowledge in the liberal arts and sciences. So you can always improve yourself as an individual. And this was important to break the caste system that had existed in the old world. And a few more things. But basically, I discussed how those constitutions were essential to help sustain the great experiment that the founding fathers of our country launched. So those 55 great founding fathers, they were definitely geniuses. Of course, they had their flaws, like every human has, but their unique contribution was that they gifted future generations of Americans. They gifted us what I call a system engineering machine, a
Mm.
system of governance that each and every generation of Americans uses to advance its own human condition. So obviously, in that construct, the responsibility became huge on the shoulders of a free people. In fact, without responsibility, there's no true freedom, my brother, as we know. They're the two sides of the same coin. Without responsibility, there's anarchy. Plus, if I'm not responsible for what I can do, then I will ultimately lose my freedom. In fact, uh, when people abandon their responsibility to govern themselves and delegate it to some entity called government to think on their behalf, act on their behalf, solve their problems on their behalf, after 2 generations of people doing that, the third generation would have absolutely no clue how to govern itself. And when government failure happens, and it ultimately will, we live in an imperfect world. Um, this is the way it is. So when major failure in government or governance happens, that's when dictatorship emerges. So they society had to learn in America always how to govern itself, and the Masonic lodges were really the key instrument that taught people. And
Mm.
after 2 generations of doing that, it was sustainable. So they wanted, it's how that those constitutions influenced many places around the world in different ways. The unique contribution was really the great American experiment. So that's the essence of my Bristonian.
And you summed it up beautifully. If anyone was unfamiliar with the award, they got a great background there. They also got great insight to you. I've been fortunate, I'm sure several of our listeners have, to see you speak in lodges or at Masonic events. For anyone that you are new on their radar now, they have an idea of the energy and the passion that you bring in your lectures, which I dig. You're instantly one of the most quotable speakers. I jotted it down. Without responsibility, there is no freedom. That's a great quote. The other thing I love when I talk about the energy is you have a phrase you use when you speak, when you go to the audience and you say, "Are you with me?" And you get us all excited to follow you with where you're going. And selfishly, I'm like, all right, I got to jot this note down. America 250 is next year, and we have to get you back on to talk about that because it's a big piece of the puzzle. Getting back to, for this episode, we're talking about marketing and communicating the craft like outside of our lodge rooms. As a past grandmaster, I'm sure you have had a significant amount of time to invest on the idea of membership development, retention. And it's interesting, you were given an honor because you speak internally and with some external audience about Freemasonry. But that seems to be the challenge, right? Is how do we share our message outside of our buildings, outside of our lodges?
Well, it is, and they are related. The challenge is internal and external, and the reason for that is that the main purpose of Freemasonry is, as we say, the cliche is to make to make better men, or make men better. In fact, if we want to refine it, really, Freemasonry it gives the individual who is willing to improve himself, okay, gives him the tools
Mm,
and provides him with the skills to learn how to become a better person. Okay, so there is that individual effort and responsibility that are really necessary. But you see, as you improve yourself within the lodge, so the lodge is the safe ecosystem. In other words, the place where you learn to improve yourself by absorbing and internalizing the fundamental lessons of Freemasonry, to reflect on the tools. And that's why lodges need to have, programs that really dissect the ritual and help the members raise questions. How does this help me become
mm,
a better person? What is happening in the dialogue of the opening of the lodge to help me a better person? So this is the internal. Without the internal, it is very difficult, extraordinarily challenging to really go to the external successfully, because excuse me, what is it that we are offering? What is it that we are, for the lack of a better word, selling? Okay, so now, since we're focused, what it is that there are many ways that Freemasonry makes itself present. I like to use the word make yourself present.
mm,
In other words, make your presence felt in your community. There are many ways of doing that. The ways that I focus on, and I advocate, and I really uh, encourage brethren to pursue um, actively. That is, identify opportunities in your community where the lodge can be a participant, maybe a lead actor, maybe a convener, okay, meaning
Mm,
it is the place that is bringing different elements of the community together. So opportunities, and those opportunities also focus on key anniversaries or key events, key dates that have to do with your community or the nation as a whole. That is the reason why I think 2026 offers an extraordinary opportunity for
absolutely.
Freemasonry to reposition itself in every single community across the United States,
Yeah.
because the history of this great experiment, it is its development, and the history and development of Freemasonry are so intimately connected. Do you hear me?
Mm,
Are you with
hmm.
me?
Yeah.
So they are really intimately connected. So how can we miss such an opportunity? We can't. I think it would be almost a crime,
I
if we
yeah.
did.
My mind is already spinning. One of the things I love about our nation's capital, I moved here 3 years ago
Mhm.
as a New York Mason, relocated to DC professionally, is how entrenched. Like you can't walk down the street without tripping over something that has to do with American history, and there's that Masonic connection, right? And I'm totally with you. I am excited to see what we present to the outside world during that America 250, because I feel like we get these key moments in time where there's a spotlight and this opportunity for us to speak. And one idea that I had that I had to jot down was maybe, and you and I are familiar with, government and contracting in that space, maybe we need to take more of a pack approach to when we promote or talk about the branding of the craft, and less of a recruitment, as less commercials that say, hey, come join Freemasonry, and just more commercials that say, here are the glorious benefits of Freemasonry in your community and in the lives of the men that are around you.
It's definitely by showing what we do and who we are in the community. That is the most attractive thing. People will immediately start asking and show interest, etc. I mean, this is the part that I focus on. I know there are different ways, again, for trying to promote the craft. I personally focus on that approach, and I call it, again, how do you position your lodge?
Mm,
And I say the lodge because there is something fundamental here. We and it reflects there again, an analogy here, or comparison between how the craft is structured in our country and how our system of government is also structured. We don't have a national central government in the United States, so we have a federal government,
hmm.
which is the government of the union. We have 50 states. They're almost 50 countries, but they are, in other words, they have a large degree of autonomy with 50 constitutions, etc. So we have 50 state governments, 50 state institutions of all kinds, you can imagine. And then we have more than 89,000 local governments in the United States. So that non-centralized and decentralized structure of government is also, in a way, very similar to how Freemasonry is structured, except that in the case of Freemasonry, we don't have a federal, uh, uh, you know,
Or even an
Congress.
international governing body.
Yeah,
It just gets to like the
exactly.
state level. Yeah.
Correct. It is at the state level. So we do have a national conference once a year where the Grand Lodges, and the Grand Masters and the leadership of the Freemasonry in the 50 states come together. But it's not like the Congress, of the states. Okay, to exchange information, etc. So it's really state and local level. So what I mentioned, state and local level. In other words, now if you're a Mason listening to us here, and you live in your town, in your city, whatever you are, you need to think first, what do we do at our local level?
Mm,
Because each city, each town in America is preparing itself for the 250th anniversary next year. So we have to start. I mean, we should have started yesterday, and some have already. But if you have not, it's not too late. But the work has to be done now in 2025 to identify the opportunities, figure out what is happening in your city, in your town in 2026. Is there a committee or a commission? In most places there are. How do you connect with it? Okay, and be part of the dialogue. And excuse me, think of activities that are being done. Think of the history of your lodge and how it connects to the history of your community. Do not, my brethren, please, I beg you, hear me out. Do not think of 2026 as the birthday, the birth date of America, and that's it.
Mhm.
If it is only about the birth date, only the 13 founding states would be celebrating it. This is a celebration of this great experiment in human governance that started 249 years ago,
Yeah.
that has transformed humanity in ways like no other civilization has ever done, in the history of humanity. I mean, freedom and democratic governance have expanded and have been sustained because of the leadership of the United States, this great experiment in human governance. And we, as Freemasons, are intimately engaged in that. And our generation today has the responsibility of being the trustee of this incredible legacy. And we should be the architects
Yeah.
of its future.
Yeah.
So think about, the history of your lodge. Who were the people involved in it? Who were the builders of the community? Uh, uh, Map out, do a mapping of your community. In other words, what are the institutions that are there? What are the civic groups that are there? What are the businesses that are there with whom you can link up? Are there private foundations? Think about ways to really come together. Do not do things only as Masons, only with your lodge or
Mhm.
your Scottish Rite Valley. Don't be insular. The key to this approach to marketing the craft is to create networks, is to leverage relationships with other institutions that are important in your community, but are not necessarily, related to Masonry. Maybe some of the founders were back then. Well, that would be great because,
Mm.
there may be some churches, there may be some institutions that can do a reenactment of a cornerstone or something. How about reaching out, for example, if you have a community college or a school, launch an essay about, the history of your town, and then say, this is Masonry that is sponsoring it. How about bringing young artists, painters, for example, who are students, and
Yeah.
say, hey, we'd like you to come up. We're sponsoring an exhibit about the history of our town and how it connects to Masonry. In Washington, D.C., we did that back in 2005, as a matter of fact. So 20 years, 21 years ahead of 2026, thinking about that. And we commissioned 21 paintings. And what we did not go to a Mason to do them. We went to a non-Mason, prominent painter. We did not exhibit in our lodges. We went to the Octagon Museum, to the
Mm.
American Institutes of Architects. We leveraged relationship, and this is how we got huge, coverage in more than 38 media coverage about this. More than 500,000 people went through the exhibit, and many of those went back to their respective states
Mm.
and knocked
Yeah.
on the door. You see where I'm getting at?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, and I'm sure there's brothers listening going, well, that's great, but like we have limited resources, we have this, and as you said, it doesn't have to be something grand and extravagant. It also doesn't have to be something that just speaks to the colonial aspect of America. You could do something as simple as volunteering to hand out American flags at local parades. That's a simple thing. That's a touch point. I had this idea where if you're in every lodge that I've visited, it doesn't matter where, always has that local historical gem, that story that they're so proud of. Why
yeah,
don't you open up your lodge that night? But instead of you just telling your story, put something out in the community. Have people come in and talk about how their family was involved with the birth and the
exactly,
history of our country.
exactly,
Also,
exactly.
if you have a great parking lot and there's a great July 4th fireworks, why don't you offer free parking for people to come and park their car? Get creative and inventive. Find a way to inject yourself, and I think the payoff, as you said, is going to be so great, that you're part of something bigger than yourself, which relates back to the craft. I want to jump to a topic that we had a great private lunch conversation in the speakers room during the New York Masonicon. It was you, Worshipful Brother Bull Garlington. We were talking about the theme of the uh, Masonic con, which kind of revolve around male loneliness. And we have, the America 250 celebration that's going on. That's one touch point that we have with the outside world. There's also this issue that's happening now and affecting the modern man. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it is something that is very important for really Masonry to focus on, because where do we get our members for in our lodges, men, these men that are coming in, so they're coming from our society. So I think it is important. We are seeing there are all kinds of studies out there, uh, especially, by the way, especially about the younger generation. So I
Mm,
think we need to strategically work at like at two dimensions, if you want, at the same time. One is focusing on people who are really adults, you know, in their 50s, in their 60s, well established. They may be, facing loneliness. They may be facing all kinds of things because of whatever is happening in their life. I think if we are able to attract those individuals because they have contributed to the community, they are
mm,
still there, and maybe this will help re-energize them and that build a new sense of community with their brethren, because that's what the lodge, provides. It's we call it in our ritual a sacred band of friends and brothers. But the idea is we cannot live alone.
mm,
This is really important, and it has tremendous value: health, mental, psychological, etc. But it also brings those individuals then who may start thinking about ways how to contribute, especially
mm.
if the lodge is active meaning focusing on really equipping their members, and enthusing them so they can go
Yeah,
out in the community and do things. Then those individuals that we bring over will start bringing their knowledge, expertise, resources, and you start turning the
diversifying.
lodge
Yeah,
around.
yeah.
And the second dimension is the younger generation, because you always have to think of the successive generations. This is about leadership. You got to prepare the new generation. And the younger generation thirsty, is thirsty for is that having really a sense of community, not the chats. There are a lot of people who are getting, in fact, disenchanted with this. They're this new generation born with technology. They're always, texting, they're on social
Mm,
media, etc., etc. Well, guess what? Our lessons are of tremendous value to them. Just think of the 24-inch gauge. These young people don't know how to manage their time.
mm,
Just imagine what the 24-inch gauge. Don't take it literally. Remember, Masonry is about symbolism. So
mhm,
it doesn't mean 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. It means how do you organize your time? And there is one part of it that has to be for refreshment and sleep, which means this is when you leave time for yourself, to reflect on yourself, to draw on your trestle board. How do you improve yourself? What is your strategic plan? In other
mm,
words, okay, young people, these lessons, how to control your tongue. Because gossip destroys friendships,
mm.
family relations, relationships in the workplace, and the penalty of the first degree, symbolically, it is really stressing the virtue of
Mm.
silence. Watch your tongue,
Yeah.
listen, watch. I can go on and on. This new younger generation needs a lot of things having to do with leadership, and honestly, the tools. So we're not your typical leadership place where people can go and take leadership. Da, 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 da. No, but our Masonry gives tools that
Mm.
are extraordinarily effective in developing, the leadership skills. So yes, we have to.
One of the themes you also touched on during our lunchtime discussion is like this is a great opportunity for us, and you were getting to it, like communicating the values, the Masonic values of truth, brotherly love, relief, charity, and that there's this need as you're seeing it that, and it's interesting they talk about male loneliness. I think that this has been something that hits certain men at certain points in their life where they're asking that bigger question of why am I here? What am I supposed to be
Mhm.
doing? That thought of seeking purpose. And if we found a better way, as you're saying, to connect those traditional benefits of Freemasonry and presented them to these guys, it would almost seem like a no-brainer, like this is something they would want to be a part of.
Absolutely, absolutely. See, this is our competitive advantage. This is
Mm,
where no other organization, I don't care what it is, I'm serious, whether religious or secular, no other institution has the gold that we have. But the gold is hidden in our ritual.
mm.
It's like, what was that movie with Nicolas Cage?
Oh, National Treasures?
National Treasure. Okay,
Yeah.
it's like a little bit like National Treasure. So
Yeah.
think of the ritual and the teachings and the lessons of free and the ceremonies of Freemasonry as National Treasure. What is really the in the movie? What was the essence of it? What is the National Treasure? The ideas, the ideals and ideas in the Declaration of Independence, in these documents. Well, for us, this is where the gold is. The true treasure is in deciphering and understanding the symbolism of what Freemasonry is trying to teach us. And by that, I mean, please, I know there are some people, I need to address this. It's the word esoteric, because the word esoteric is understood in so many different ways and misunderstood in even greater ways. So the word comes from the Greek esoterikos, which simply means hidden. However, some people think of esoteric as like, okay, so we need to go to understand what Masonry is about. We need to go and look at all these various organizations and groups out there, whether it is the Kabbalists, whether it is the Martinists, whether it is the Rosicrucians, etc. There's nothing wrong with that. But one does not need to go to those to understand the essence of Masonry. If one wants to pursue that, that is fine. The key thing is simple. Ask always a question. How does this help me improve myself? When the Tyler is doing his, just think of the ritual. The master is speaking to the senior warden. Before opening the lodge, there is a dialogue. What is this all about? Closing, filing the lodge.
That simple question. Yeah.
Yeah, that's you. Ask, how does that happen? Oh, so how do I tile myself? So before I govern myself, I need to make sure I'm tiled. What does it mean, tiled? It means I keep away that negative energy, the bad ideas, the noise, because we live in a world today where noise is everywhere because of instantaneous messaging, social media. My God, they don't give you a moment to reflect. So you need to almost tune out a little bit every day. Make it, that's the 24-inch gauge. Do it, religiously on a daily basis to be able to really center yourself and understand where you are and where you're going to be headed. So before you act, before you speak, before you do anything, ask the question. Ask the question. There are 3 pillars in the lodge. That's for you.
Yeah.
We say the institute, it's you. Beauty, strength, wisdom. Ask, is what I am about to do, is it promoting beauty or ugliness? Ask. Is it strengthening my relationship with my brethren, or is it weakening it? Is it strengthening the lodge or weakening it? Is it strengthening my family or weaken it? Is it wise or foolish? Ask, and then every one of us, that's why it's an individual path. Each and every one of us has their own circumstances, life circumstances and context. So, but all these, the wonderful thing about these tools, they relate to us, but we need to ask. And that's the essence of Masonic education. How do we teach the entered apprentice to raise questions? Questions, not simply to learn about, what is all the various bodies and just the history. The history is important, etc. But really, that doesn't make you improve yourself. That may inspire you to improve yourself. You got to apply the tools, and then think how you apply them in the community.
Well, you also prompted another question that we have in our ritual, and there's already a pre-programmed answer, what came you here to do, right? And the answer to improve myself.
Right.
And I think for so many of us, if you've gone to your lodge meetings on a regular basis, you repeat that in your head as you hear it. But are you really thinking about like what that means to you? You were coming here for this purpose. What does it mean to improve yourself? when we talk about the question of the membership value proposition, that's the answer. And it's going to be very
Absolutely.
individual.
Absolutely. That is the beauty of it. Absolutely. Excuse me. It's fundamental. Without asking those questions that relate to each one of us, that is, I'm raising those questions that relate to me, and then I can speak to another brother to get their experience. Maybe I can learn from that, but I need to do that, because, and this is where I feel empowered, and it really transforms me. It is by, and where the application happens, in outside,
Mhm.
outside of the lodge. This is all to help us then improve our life, ultimately outside the lodge. In other words, in our community, make our communities better, make our families better, make the workplace better, etc., etc. And there is another thing you mentioned. You mentioned the first, which is the first thing an entered apprentice learns is why did you come here? Okay, there are two things: learn to improve yourself. Learn to improve myself. I'm improving myself. Nobody's improving me. Okay, to learn to improve myself in masonry, and to subdue my passions. Why is that important? The three elements of Freemasonry, and they're not mentioned in an ad hoc manner. There is reason behind it. It is brotherly love, relief, and then truth. You cannot get to truth without starting with brotherly love. Brotherly love means I need to really understand my brother and be brotherly. Okay. I cannot be attacking. I need to be brotherly, even if we differ. That's the beauty of masonry. It was bring people of of different faiths, of having different political opinions, maybe of different ethnicities, learn how to work together under a rule of law called masonry. Okay,
Mm.
improve themselves and learn that self-governance. So brotherly love is essential. Then we jump to relief. And what is relief? Relief is not only to provide aid and assistance. That is the exoteric, that is the open. Okay, exoterikos in Greek, meaning obvious. But there is always also the hidden. It's because it's symbolism. How do I relieve myself of those things that shackle my mind and my spirit? It's about freedom.
Mm.
It's about freedom. In other words, how do I relieve myself from prejudice, from preconceived notions when I'm speaking to my brother? Because if I don't, I'm going to be judgmental. It is only by being brotherly, then relieving myself of those things, that make my mind more open to receive his experience, okay, where he's coming from, to build the understanding that we can then address truth more solidly. Otherwise, people fight.
Yeah. We've had a great
Truth is not
conversation.
easy.
Yeah, no, this is. I'm just thinking our listener and to those watching the live stream on YouTube, you're getting a very high level marketing conversation. We've talked about branding, we've talked about strategic partnerships, identifying stakeholders, value proposition. We haven't gotten into the role. We talked about targeting audiences, but we haven't gotten into the role of technology. And we kind of, you mentioned like apps, and young people tend to be on it. And I started thinking about it that this goes beyond using technology like AI or machine learning or VR headsets or what, but the instant technology that you're seeing every day in social media and how we can start to use that as a better tool. And one idea that I jotted down just for us at Craftsman Online is we need to stop putting so much content out that talks about the history of Freemasonry and more that talks about the experience of it, the
Yeah.
benefits that can be seen in the members of our fraternity.
Yes, absolutely. Two things. The history, it's listen, we're Americans, and Americans. One of the flaws of us, or one of the listen, everything has always there's always cost and benefit, right, to everything.
Mhm.
We Americans are not as focused on history in general. We focus on the present and the future. Now that has a great benefit, and the great benefit is that it helps us turn the page. You know, other nations, other cultures around the world that are so into history. History is a burden. Okay, it's hard for them. I remember, having, this is years ago in the 90s during the Balkans conflict. When between Serbs and Croats and Bosnians, and people were telling me, "But Akram, I opened my window and the house across the street is 700 years old. It hits me in the face. History hits us in the face. We cannot, it's not we cannot, it is so challenging, so difficult to overcome that burden, to shed that burden of history. So that is the positive side. That's why in America, we Americans, we change more quickly. We accept, we experiment, we fail, we learn, we try again, we do. So all that because we're not as much in history. Of course, the cost is that we're also missing the good lessons of history. So it is important to mention something about our history, but what is needed today, and that I would say in that history, it may do it mainly to educate people coming in. But honestly, most people knock in on the door, increasingly, I shouldn't say most people, but increasingly from what I've seen, they've done their research. They know a little bit about, maybe too much, but they know something about the connections and founding fathers or something like that. So yes, that can be built up. But the key thing today, and I say today because this is a challenge, we must bring in the new generation. And again, I say 2026 is an extraordinary opportunity to help energize our craft across the country, focusing on projects, on things that have to do with the community, expose what we do. So online, using technology, this is the stuff that we should be talking about. So 2 points I want to mention about technology. One, when Masons are talking among themselves, it doesn't matter what platform they're using. Please, I beg you, my brethren, think of this platform as if it were a lodge. In other words, tile yourself. Don't throw in comments just like that. A word spoken cannot be taken back. If I am speaking with my brother face to face and I make a faux pas, I do something that hurts him, I can take it back right there. I can hug him, embrace him. Okay. I can apologize right there. There's that human contact. You can, connect. But virtually no one has a clue of the state of mind that your brother is on the other side of the chat. You have no idea. So you have thought about something, you are quick and you send something. How will it impact your brother on the other side? Okay. And then people may feel, injured or insulted, and they will forget about controlling their passions and they fire back. So this technological tool is fantastic to help us keep the bond, and strengthen it among ourselves. But we've got to treat the platform that we're using as if it were a lodge, meaning tile yourself, think, gavel yourself before you govern. You're your master, okay? The master gavels to make sure everybody in the lodge gets in their place. They're silent before he starts governing, opening the lodge. You gavel yourself. So think of the gavel as the tool. Mentally, gavel yourself before you react. So hold on. Take a deep breath, tile myself, and then think, and think about it. I know it takes some effort, but that's important because so many brothers have disrupted and destroyed relationships, fraternal relationships among themselves, not just in America, across the world, because of not understanding how to use wisely, with beauty and strength, how to use those tools. So that's for us. As far as engaging the public, it's exactly what you said earlier. Anything that we do using technology that engages the public, it should be about things that have to do with the community that we're doing now. If there is anything with history, if it should be around like special anniversaries and organize an event, okay? And organize an event. Again, as I mentioned, this is a wonderful opportunity. The history of the lodge, the history of the town, there may be cornerstone opportunities, all kinds of things. Use technology, use these platforms to make those announcements, to let the people, and think of it like something inspirational. In other words, somebody going there and reading this stuff said, oh, wow, how can I participate? That sounds interesting. Maybe I can tell my friends. So not about the history, dull, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Not that it's not important, but it is what excites people to come and participate, because we need to capture a
Mm.
new generation.
I'll give an example of that. But I just wanted to say, I love having you on the podcast. I told you this was the best start to a Friday. I feel like going and running for 3 miles after this. I got so much energy. I wish I could get like a moment with Akram every morning to get some of this to
Well, that's
go.
very kind of you.
And I'll leave you and our listener with this final question around that idea of like, how do we paint the picture? So, I always say to my New York brothers, oh, you got to come visit in DC. Oh, I'd love to come down there. I was like, you know what? Here's a neat way to think about it. My favorite part about going to lodge is that I get to pass the Washington Monument every time I drive to the Alma Shrine where St. John's Lodge meets now. I get to see that every month. And if that doesn't hit you between the ears when you are sitting there looking and thinking about Washington before you go into a lodgem as a Mason, my brother, I don't know what else would fire you up to come in here and, use your mind as a living stone.
Yeah.
So I would love to leave our listener with this question from you and your reply. Your vision for the future of Freemasonry talked about America 250 next year, but beyond that, what are you seeing for the future of our craft?
Well, I think the future for our craft is preparing the new generation to, and I like to use the word that the lodge would graduate. Okay,
Mm,
graduate young, engaged, free, enlightened citizens. We need always a vibrant civil society in our country. Each generation needs it. And this is important to preserve this great experiment, and not just preserve it, in other words, to preserve its principles, main foundations, but to keep pushing it forward. It's an experiment, always in the making, forward looking, etc. But our people, for Freemasonry in the United States, we cannot have generations of Americans who don't understand the system of governance. Why is our government structured the way it is? Why do we have separation of powers? Why do we have checks and balances? Why do we have limited government? Because that's important, by limiting the power and the role of government. Not that government is not important. Government is very important. James Mason said, if we were angels, we would not need government, but we're not angels, and we will not be governed by angels, right? But as John Locke and Adam Smith, I mean, these are important. That really, it's important. Those great ideas of the Enlightenment of the 18th century are still valid. We improve on them. We build on them. We don't take things literally. You keep building on these, but the essence is still extraordinarily valid. We need limited government. Limited meaning limited in its relationship with business and in its relationship with civil society. Think of our system of governance, and I describe this in great details in my Prestonian lecture, by the way. Okay, it is like a three-legged stool. Government is one leg with its three levels. Okay, government one leg, business is one leg, free enterprise, and civil society in the third leg. It is how do we keep the three constantly in balance? Each one is expected to fulfill a role in governance. And business, so business ethics, business leadership, business what? Civil society, engaged citizens. It is citizens who create businesses. It is citizens who organize and create NGOs and associations. So what we need is enlightened, engaged, free citizens, as many as possible. Our mission, the way I look at it after beyond 2026, beyond the 250th, are we going to be the laboratory, the lab that is going to, or the incubator that is going to graduate a new generation of free, engaged citizens?
We're going to leave that there. And I can't wait to get you back to expand on that on a future episode. But for this one and today, most worshipful, thank you so much for your time and for being a part of the Craftsmen Online podcast.
It was my pleasure, really my pleasure to be with you and the audience in general. I wish you all the best. You're doing great work. I appreciate it. Great being
Perfect.
with you.
All right, we are clear. I'll let you get to where you got to go next, but just a quick request.
Yeah.
If we're doing a committee in DC for America 250 for next
Yeah.
year, or if there's, I'd love to be a part of it in some way. That
I
sounds
will,
awesome.
I